This is actually a condominium that was about 3 years old, and everything looked beautiful and pristine on the outside, but because the balcony columns did not have flashing along the deck, water was traveling from one column down to another column, and within a very short period of time had rotted out the columns. And you can see the wood, it almost looks like it's burnt and charred, but that's just because it was saturated with water and began to deteriorate. So this is a problem that, had they done a transition study, and in this case they did not do one, could have picked up. An engineer going around could see that there was no flashing there and recognize that as a problem. The failure to insulate, the failure to properly flash windows. Here's one example of flashing windows that I pulled from the internet. But if you do not properly flash windows, and this is usually concealed behind the siding, but there can be evidence of it that an expert can pick up, water just comes in the building. Every time you have an opening in the side of a wall, it's an opportunity for water to come in your building, because water travels down behind siding and brick masonry. And here's an example of a window that was not properly flashed. You can actually see that there was a leak. This is the head of the window and this is the bottom of the window, but there was a leak that developed at the top, and the developer came back and actually drywalled, tried to fix the drywall, but then the leak came back again because all they were doing was fixing the cosmetic result of the leak and not the source. You can see that it's dripped down onto the ledge. The same thing with flashing for masonry. Masonry veneer walls are designed to have moisture travel down behind them, and that's why you have that Tyvek paper that you see on all new construction, the plastic sheets that go over the wood, because it creates a drainage plane so that moisture that gets behind the brick travels down it, but it has to get out. If it doesn't get out from behind the wall, then where is it going to go? It's going to go into your house. So one of the ways that water is drained from these buildings is through weep holes, and here's some examples of weep holes. These are little holes that most people don't even notice in the brick, usually at the base of the brick or above any kind of openings like windows. And what happens is there's this flashing that turns out at the weep holes, and so any moisture that comes down is turned out to the exterior of the building by this flashing, and that goes in between the mortar joint, in between the bricks, and right above it is a little hole, and you see these. So an expert going through a building, if they don't see these weep holes or they don't see the flashing, it can be a red flag that there's a potential problem that a homeowner would never even know about until a lot of damage was done. And as I said, if you address these problems in the beginning, it's very easy to fix. But if you wait until the damage is done, it's much more difficult to fix. It's harder to get the developer to repair. The time has gone by, and it's harder to get the subcontractors back. Now here's a picture of a home where there was no flashing and weep holes at the base of the wall. So during rain events, the water was just coming into this home, just actually pouring into this home. And this is actually the person's kitchen, and they had to take out all the walls, all the floor, and move all their furniture into the back of the room, and actually move her out to a hotel while they were correcting this. So that is why it is important to get a transition study, because it gives the board, it fulfills the board's duty, and later on, if there is a problem, people will look back and see, what did the board do? What did the board do to assess the common areas while we still had warranties? I always advise homeowners, the first thing you do is you take the transition study and you take it to the developer, and you ask the developer to meet with you to discuss the report, to see if there's some areas of agreement and disagreement, but also ask for a tolling agreement. What is a tolling agreement? Well, when a condominium association comes to the developer for the first time early in its life, a newly constructed community with a report that identifies construction deficiencies, it wields a large club at the negotiating table, because as an association it can assert its own claims, and it can assert the claims of homeowners that reside at the condominium. And this includes 4 separate warranties and other causes of action such as breach of contract or negligent construction or negligent misrepresentation, or even violation of the Consumer Protection Act, for which attorney's fees can be recovered. So the developer knows that you have these rights, and while it sounds a little bit sarcastic, that does make the developer sit up and pay notice to the condominium association in a way that it would not if it did not have those rights. So an association needs to preserve those rights so that it can continue to negotiate from a position of strength. Tolling agreements do that for homeowners and condominium associations. The rights that I'm talking about, the warranties, the negligent construction, they all are of limited duration. They are controlled by a statute of limitations, which is the period within which those claims must be filed in a court of law, or they're forever barred. There's 2 ways to stop the statute of limitations from running. One is to file a lawsuit. Generally, second is to get a tolling agreement from the responsible party. Tolling agreement is just a timeout. It basically says that we're going to sign this agreement, and from this day until we terminate the tolling agreement, the clock will stop on our statute of limitations so that we can negotiate. So we don't have to worry about filing a lawsuit against the developer to preserve our claims, because the courts will enforce this private agreement. It's basically a timeout. That way, if you have a tolling agreement in place, as you negotiate with the developer, the developer knows that if the negotiations don't work out, don't pan out, that you have the same rights that you had in the beginning. Because what happens is, without a tolling agreement, you come to the negotiating table with a big club, and as the time goes on, that club eventually turns into a twig, and pretty soon the developer is not being responsive, and they're ignoring you or doing just enough to keep you off their back, and then eventually they're just hoping that you'll give up and go away. So it's important for associations to preserve their claims and not allow their warranties to expire. The biggest mistake I see is that homeowners meet with a developer, they bring their transition or deficiency study, the developer says, okay, I'm going to fix X, Y, and Z in this report. And the homeowners all say hallelujah, and they move on, and everybody's happy. The next thing you know, a truck pulls up out front of the condominium, a bunch of people jump out with caulk guns, and they're all over the building. Nobody knows what they're doing, why they're doing it, or where they're doing it. 6 months later, everything's leaking again. What was the problem? The problem is that nobody defined what repair means, and the council made itself, put itself in the position of being an expert consultant, deciding what would be acceptable for the developer to do. What should have happened is, when the developer said, I will repair those, somebody should have said, okay, how are you going to repair them? Put it in writing for us, or tell us how you're going to do it so we can document it. Have your architect, your engineer, or your construction consultant review that repair, and then they can tell you, the board, since the board is not an expert, that that's a good repair that the developer is proposing, that it's a bad repair that's not going to work, or that it could be a good repair if you added A, B, and C. In that manner, the board can make informed decisions about how to proceed, and can negotiate with the developer to get something in writing that creates an objective standard by which the developer's work can be judged. And that is how you create accountability. Otherwise, the developer will just go out and do whatever the developer thinks is the appropriate repair, without any input from the association or its consultant. And this often results in people telling me, well, they've been repairing and it keeps leaking and it keeps leaking, and that's because nobody has brought on the proper consultants to make sure that the developer is addressing the source of the problem.